You're going to intervene.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Richard Morco, and this is Long Hill Report. This afternoon we have Bob Breer, Historian Laureate of Sturbridge, unofficial, and Sylvia Buck, who went on an amazing historical adventure that landed them in the Pacific Ocean and in the middle of a volcano. They started out in Boston in Route 20 and ended up in Oregon in Route 20. Route 20 is the longest road in the country, and they made the trek, and please tell us about it.
This all came about when a gentleman by the name of Brian Farr came to Sturbridge. He wanted some information on US Route 20 because he was going to write a book. And so I told him some things that we had in Sturbridge about Route 20. And then we talked a little bit more together. Then we asked Brian if he'd come to Sturbridge and talk a little bit about this trip he was going to take. And he talked about the highlights he had already started on Route 20. And it was quite fascinating. You know, people, when summer comes, they're going to go on vacation. They go to the beach every year. They go to Disney World maybe every other year. Or they go on a cruise every year. And they miss the beauty of this country. And I think once we decided we were going to follow Brian on his trip to Oregon, this is a way to go. You can see so much. Some places it's certainly different than what we see here with the forest when there are no forests. But yet in their own way, they're beautiful. So we'd like to have you join us in our journey. Not Brian's trip, we'll use maybe some of his pictures, but others that Sylvia took on the trip. So, are we ready to go to Oregon?
Let's take us to Oregon.
I'd like to show you a photo from Brian's book. This is the beginning of Route 20. As he called it, Historic U.S. Route 20. It starts in Kenmore Square in Boston, and I think everybody recognizes the Kenmore sign. From there, we will jump a little bit. And Sylvia said, but people know about New England. They've seen most of New England. So we're going to start ours off something you've seen on television, the Field of Dreams. We're going to start in Iowa. And it was by happenstance that we got that far and said, oh, the Field of Dreams is here. Why not go and see it while we're able to? Which we did.
Field of Dreams was a movie, in case you've forgotten. And the theme was, if you build it, they will come. And this is the Field of Dreams.
I think you all recognize it.
In Iowa.
In a cornfield, a man had a dream that the ball players of the past came and they wanted to use a ball field. I assume he may have made the ball field for his children. But then as the movie goes on, you find what went into creating a field, and all the old-time ball players that we remember came and played on the Field of Dreams.
Can I ask you, Bob?
Yes.
Sylvia, when you were there, did you see any of the old-time players actually yourselves?
No.
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
Okay, Sylvia. Really? Which one? Tell me.
Oh, I forgot his name, but he was there, clearly. But the corn was only this high, so he had to scrunch down.
Okay, if you remember in the movie, they came out of the corn.
Yes.
But the corn was not as high.
Not high enough. They
Not
had
as
to
high
kind
as
of
an elephant's
scrunch
high,
down.
as the song would have it.
But another Iowa
There
place.
were young fellows out there playing baseball on the field. Anyone can use it, no charge, but they don't want organized teams out on the field. I guess they probably figure they'll tear it up with their exuberance.
A question when you were in Iowa. I've heard that Iowa is flat, and that if you had a soapbox, you could see most of the state. if you stood on the soapbox, it's so flat, you could see most of the state. Is that true? Is it that flat?
I never looked at it that way, but it is flat.
All right.
You'd have to be able to stand taller than the corn, because there's corn for miles in
Okay,
Iowa.
well, right. Well, maybe a little platform, a little above the corn. And
Yes.
What made this trip interesting is we were used to Route 20, and starting particularly in Boston,
Yeah.
with all the traffic, we were in Nebraska, and I said to her, "Oh, a traffic jam up ahead." And she looked and said, "Where?" Because you're looking probably 6 miles, straight road, nobody there, and there were 3 cars coming at the same time. That's how crowded it was.
You were
It-
brave.
It's
You
a
see
different
a-
Route 20.
You were
might
brave,
say.
though.
You see a car, one in maybe a mile. One of the interesting places we crossed was the Lewis and Clark Expedition Trail. Now, almost everybody that's familiar with U.S. history knows about Lewis and Clark exploring the country for President Thomas Jefferson. And they traveled by boat, canoe, walking, and they did it the hard way. What made it interesting for us when we were out there is we were looking for information about Thomas Proctor Howard. According to the men that went on that expedition, he was born in Brimfield, and we have tried for a number of years to find out where was Thomas Proctor Howard born, and we have not found any record of his birth. But he did die in St. Louis after the expedition was over. So that's an interesting thing to cross the actual road that Thomas Proctor Howard must have walked on.
Yeah. Well, that was Main Street in Brimfield. It still is, I would guess. But 20, is that not going through Main Street on Brimfield, in Brimfield?
We don't know where he lived exactly in
But I
Brimfield,
mean, he would have had to have crossed
He
it.
would have, yeah, I'm sure.
but he was with the Lewis and Clark group.
Ashfall, and Sylvia can talk about Ashfall. I once went on an archaeological dig when we were in Stourbridge, England, for about an hour and watched people on their hands and knees digging, sifting through dirt to find any artifacts. Ashfall was different. It was a huge, as big as an airplane hangar. And would you like to?
The building covered a dig of many people working over this large area that had occurred. The animals that they found buried in the ash fall had occurred many, many eons ago when a volcano from many miles away had spewed its ash, covering this whole territory. Now, it wasn't the ash that smothered the animals, but the ash fall, which was all ground glass. As the animals would feed on the grass, they would inhale the glass particles, and it affected their lungs, and eventually they died. They congregated at a watering hole here and there and the other place. So this ashfall fossil dig is by one of those waterfalls and shows some of the skeletons still in place as they're digging.
Did they build the building afterwards?
Yes, yeah, well,
Afterwards
yes.
To cover the
Yes,
dig?
and to make a display for us to see how it's done and all.
And there are all kinds of fossils in there, animal fossils, birds. And these people were working diligently to try to uncover these and yet not disturb them.
So, so that's basically the museum itself is that building?
Yes.
For
it's-
that purpose, yes.
And the dig is probably more important than the people coming to see it.
Yeah. Next big point.
Yes. We skipped over a lot of things that we could have talked about. Out in Fredonia, in New York, is an opera house. I understand that many town halls used to have a big meeting room in their second floor that they called the Opera House. And in Fredonia, they had renovated their town hall opera house so that it was just a beautiful place to see. and it carries productions, both live impersonators, up-to-date movies, imported operas on film, and so on. Another place we spent a few minutes looking at was Oberlin, Ohio College, where Lucy Stone attended as one of the early women to attend. It was one of the first colleges to admit women and black students. And this is the Methodist Church where she might have spoken from the pulpit.
do
We're
know
not
we-
sure.
we-
She
we-
did speak a lot.
We recently observed in West Brookfield.
Yes, that's why I'm
the
mentioning
centennial,
Lucy
yeah.
Stone, yes.
Of course, she was a Route 9 girl, not a Route 20 girl.
Well,
Yeah.
she's in the neighborhood. And we also stopped at Debate Square, where Lincoln and who? Douglas had their great debate.
Do you know they spoke for hours at a time?
Well, some of us can do that.
Well, actually, that was before TV, and the attention span was a lot longer.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
They were used to it in church.
Yeah.
yes.
Sermons were a lot longer. An interesting place that we knew about only through Brian's book and looking at it. Didn't have any idea where it was. We were traveling down the road and there's a sign, Hell's Half Acre. And you'd think it's a mini Grand Canyon. It's probably a mile in length, but the beautiful colors, and it's deep.
And what state is that?
This is in Nebraska.
In Nebraska. You don't think of Nebraska as having that type of...
No, it's just level ground, and then there's this great big chasm, which takes up, I don't know, several acres. The natives used to use that by getting the animals corralled and forcing them to run into the chasm to catch them.
as
And
a way of slaughtering
yes,
them?
as a way of slaughtering them. You can't go down into it, but it is certainly beautiful.
That is quite a natural...
We crossed the Continental Divide.
This is a sort of a double picture. In Wyoming, we crossed the Continental Divide. In itself, now we're in the mountains. We're not in the flatlands anymore. And in fact, we stopped into a restaurant and got sandwiches to go and sat near the top of the Continental Divide where we had lunch. But it's just one of those experiences. How often is anybody from Massachusetts or Brimfield or Sturbridge going to get a chance to cross the Continental Divide? Most of the adults today have learned about the divide through history books, but the younger people probably have no idea what you're talking about.
Probably not.
Well, it's one thing to see it, pictures or movies. It's another thing to drive it. You really get an idea of what the country is all about, how vast it is driving. My family and I used to do this annually with our kids as they grew up and up and up and up. And when they were in high school, they mentioned to me one time, you know, our classmates don't have any idea how big this country is. And driving it, you do. You didn't speak about Cody, Wyoming.
You know, we've all heard about rodeos, or most of us have heard about rodeos, but you never see one. I remember as a kid having my cousins take me to the Providence Arena to see Roy Rogers when he was in his heyday, and you know, live stunts and horses and steers and roping going on. We were in Cody, had gone through a museum, and we saw a sign, rodeo, tonight. So I says, you want to go to rodeo? She says, I've never been to a rodeo. I've never seen anything like that, even on television. I says, we'll go to the rodeo. And it was quite an experience to be there and actually see them doing roping and tying up the feet of the steer and all against the clock.
And bull riding, or horse riding.
Yep.
And you've spoken how clean it was in there.
Yes, I thought it'd be kind of Western smelly, but it was very nice, very fresh smelling. And we watched
it's
them.
outside, you know.
Yes, yes.
So,
Oh, this is in an arena.
Yeah.
It was
Inside,
inside.
right?
Inside, yeah. I must say this: everybody's cheering for the Cowboys. Somebody was cheering for the bull.
okay. So
Well-
you guys going to the bullfighting in Spain, so you could cheer for the
And
bull.
no, I don't
Yeah.
think so. Buffalo Bill Cody was known for supporting women's rights, so he's a good hero as well as a Western guy. That town was named for him, Cody, Wyoming.
What time of year did you go? I assume you went
July.
high summer, because they say about Wyoming, there's 3 seasons: July, August, and winter. So I
We
assume
did
you-
not go in winter.
It was. I think it was. We began late June, and so we're in July. There in
it
July.
wasn't unbearably hot anywhere we went.
well, it's
Not like
it's kinda
this year
normal,
was
yeah.
here. Now everybody knows this.
Right.
Old Faithful.
Old Faithful.
Well, we got a chance to get into Yellowstone, and with this goal in mind, we've got to see Old Faithful and try to time it right. Old Faithful is very predictable. They know exactly when it's going to spew forth, and the tourists are wandering all over the place, and all of a sudden you see this migration from around the area going, so they've already checked the time, and we were fortunate. Right after we got there, it was the right time to see Old Faithful. Of course, there are buffalo. These are, again, this is from Brian's book, and he took all the pictures that are in here. And we got a few pictures of buffalo, but we were amazed at the number of antelope we saw.
And elk and bison, bear. But one of the things I like about the real Wild West is the ability to see antelope. You don't see antelope in the East, that's for
No.
sure.
Well,
And it's just kind of fun to spy them out in the fields.
we do see the deer, but we don't see them together with the antelope
No.
playing, according to the song.
No,
No, no.
and it gets cloudy. Right?
Okay.
Out there, it's supposed it was not
Bob
cloudy
Breer
all
will be
day.
here all afternoon. And
Another fascinating place that, again, we read through Brian's book first, and we're picking out some of the things we wanted to see. And Sylvia said, I'd like to see the craters of the moon. And these are some of the photos that he took of the craters of the moon. And I thought that there are other things there in the craters of the moon that I'd have chosen to put in the book. But
They're
Sylvia
the
can-
remains of ancient volcanoes. And here are some examples of spatter cones from early, long ago volcanoes. The same kinds of volcanoes that did those animals in at Ashfall. It's amazing if you're open to adventure, the number of things you can see that you never heard of and that come back the richer for. As we approached Oregon, the Three Sisters. And we stopped at a restaurant, the only restaurant for miles and miles away. It didn't look too promising. It was located in a town called Oasis, if that gives you any clue, but it was all we had to choose from. So we went in, had a very good meal, and got a very good tip from one of the waitresses on a restaurant to go to in Newport, Oregon. But out in the foyer of the restaurant was an actual $50,000 reward offered for information leading to the arrest and conviction for theft of cattle. Still today, an up-to-date reward sign. And another one, handwritten, about lost ropes. Please return them. Would you ever see a sign like that in a restaurant? Lost ropes.
Well, the diner, I checked the diner down the street. They don't.
They didn't
They
have
don't.
one. No.
And Sylvia, would you tell them about cinder cones?
I like this cinder cone picture, and we actually saw this view. There was irrigated crop growing in front of it, and here's this cinder cone in the fellow's backyard. How would you like that?
Well,
Cinder
how-
cone.
it's a
Many years ago, a dead volcano.
Just a dead volcano left.
We saw a number of crops irrigated, wheat and corn and so on. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to raise them. We saw this sign and had never seen this in the East for years. It says, what does it say?
I can't see.
Chain removal area. Pull over here to remove the chains. And earlier up the road, we had seen a pull-off saying, put your chains on here. This is a steep road, but who uses chains anymore? They do.
There, yeah.
We were talking about the cinder cones and the volcanic area. Miles and miles and miles were covered with volcanic magma that cooled and eventually broke down into bits and pieces. Flowers grow right up through those bits and pieces. And eventually they are crunched down enough that you have a nice flower field from this kind of a spatter cone.
Murals? Several cities or large towns out there had murals painted on a different picture on different buildings. But this is one in Vail, Oregon, and there are, I don't know, maybe a dozen buildings that had murals on them, and it told the story of the Oregon Trail. And there's another little quirk. Us New Englanders get chided for our English. I've always called it Oregon, but it's Oregon.
Oregon
It's like it's G-U-N, the way they pronounce Oregon.
Everywhere you looked, if there was a side of a building, there was a mural on it. It was an artistic competition at some points, but it was also a way to beautify their town and to tell the history of their town. Murals all around.
How you doing? I'm not sure the camera can pick this up, but this picture in my left hand is the view you get coming into Newport, Oregon, where the first time you get to see your goal, the Pacific Ocean, in the background. And that was, to me, it was a thrill to say, we're here, we made it. You know, not everybody can convince their partner, you want to go to Oregon or you want to go to Timbuktu and get the response, yeah, let's go. And to actually make it's 3,365 miles. And so that makes it close to 9,000 miles by the time we get through sightseeing and things, but that was actual mileage. So it makes for an interesting ride.
The Pacific looks just something like the Atlantic, as a matter of fact, but the sun comes up on the wrong side.
She was
Beat you to it?
can't keep anything from you.
It's quite disorienting. I spent a week in Seattle one year, and over here, where the sun should be, was all these mountains, and over here, where the sun should be coming up, was the ocean. It was just very, very confusing.
Well, you'll have to go down to South America to
Oh,
see.
yes. I
Really
did go down to Chile.
We showed you Kenmore Square in the beginning. Well, here's the end of Route 20, where it joins U.S. Highway 101 in Newport, Oregon. I guess I was pretty proud of the fact we made it all the way to Oregon, and I stopped at the newspaper office and said, we just traveled across the country from the beginning of Route 20 to here in Newport, the end of it. Would anybody be interested in that? And the reporter says, I'll meet you on the beach at 6 o'clock tonight. And she did a very nice story about from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And particularly she's quite taken with the fact that we would carry a peanut butter jar of Atlantic Ocean to pour into their water and refill it and bring it back.
So if anything has been changed in the ecology of both oceans,
Yes, it's all his fault.
it's through all his fault. You had nothing to do with it.
No, no.
Sylvia is passing the buck.
Again, we've got a few minutes more.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'd like to tell you about the highlight of this trip. We went to a state park, or in fact, it may even be the national park, and it was going to be able to see a view of Mount St. Helens. And now that exploded in 1988, I believe it was, and Sylvia saw it a year or so after that from a mountainside looking over to it. And she was looking in the gift shop, and I saw a sign, helicopter rides around Mount St. Helens. I said, ooh. Then I looked at the price, and I said, oh. Well, that sort of dampened my spirits. But then there was another sign, fly into the crater of Mount St. Helens. And I said, well, she'll never buy this. She doesn't like heights. So I said, would you like to fly into the crater of Mount St. Helens? She says, oh, sure. So I used a credit card I carried with me that I've never used, and I said, okay, here we go.
It was well worth it. It was up the length. I had read extensively about the eruption of Mount St. Helens and how damaging it was and how it flowed down the Toutle River Creek. And so that when I went there on my own, driving along, I saw these warning signs that still are in place saying, if this horn sounds, the mountain might be about to erupt. Turn around and go back. Well, we didn't hear any horn sound, but we were way above ground by then.
Being a gentleman, I let Sylvia sit next to the pilot, and I took the second seat. And she got some great photographs of inside the crater of Mount St. Helens. Did you bring them on with you? Or some?
I brought one.
Oh, you brought one.
Yes.
Oh,
But the gal that was flying the helicopter took us in and circled around and climbed and actually covered the whole ground. I'll tell you that we did see 2 steam vents. So I think at some point in time, and maybe not the too distant future, they may have another eruption and a huge mound that is still growing inside the mountain.
I don't think that will be the day you'll want to go for your next
Next
ride. But you were certainly intrepid to do that, I have to say.
The only negative thought I had was suppose these helicopters going there, whoop, 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 disturb something underground, and that's the trigger. This is going to be very exciting.
Yeah, well,
Keep the cameras rolling. But well, it was a great trip. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. And I'll just tell the listeners, if you're going to take a vacation, take a vacation. Go and see this country. There's so much to see and so much beauty in this country. And people are missing it.
And be ready for the adventure. You never know what's going to come up next and where you're going to sleep that night or where your next meal is coming from. Be ready for the adventure.
so you were just going up the street, but there was something around every metaphorical corner.
That's right.
Except Route 20 doesn't go around many corners
No,
in certain
It
places.
was a metaphorical
Yes, all right.
It only looks straight on the map that Brian put together. But you can see there's some curves, or some of those curves are up mountains and down the other side. So it's an adventure, it's an experience, and don't miss it. Next year, find a way.
Well, thank you very much, Sylvia Buck and Bob Breer,
You're welcome.
and come back again.
And come
Thank
for a
you.
trip
Thank
with
you.